Daily Detroit is brought to you by the community. Support our work at patreon.com/dailydetroit.
On your Daily Detroit, COVID-19 continues to rage in Michigan, and a new mask mandate may be in the cards as cases soar and an increasing number of deaths are on the horizon. Election misinformation continues with the spotlight on Detroit, plus two short conversations. Technologist Tom Lawrence joins me to break down Michigan's newest constitutional amendment around digital privacy. Proposal 2 was basically the only thing everyone could agree on this week. And finally, I caught up with Art Reyes of We the People Michigan during a Count Every Vote rally in Detroit's New Center. I'm Jer Stays, and this is episode 629 of your Daily Detroit, recorded on Thursday, November 5th, 2020. Let's get started as we do with the latest statewide COVID-19 numbers. So, are you sitting down for this one? More than 5,700 new coronavirus cases were reported Thursday, along with 51 deaths. That brings the totals in Michigan to nearly 198,000 cases and 7,470 fatalities. In a presser today, Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer said she wants to bring back mask orders, but this time with the support of the Michigan legislature. Public health officials in the administration are saying that Michigan is on track to have 100 deaths per day by the end of this year. This is on the heels of more than 5 times the number of new cases now than we saw at the beginning of September. Although we aren't seeing the same number of hospitalizations as we did in the spring right now, the numbers are rising with a focus on outstate areas. And there are nearly 600 known outbreaks that the state is currently tracking. But 50% of cases are currently a mystery as to where the patient got the virus. Contact tracing is, according to COVID Act Now, at just 6% of the capacity we would need to get our hands around the pandemic locally. Speaking of local, Wayne County is about to join Oakland, Macomb, Livingston, and Monroe counties as areas where epidemiologists would recommend stay-at-home orders to control the spread. And as some of you have gone out to a restaurant may know, you've had to give your name and phone number for coronavirus contact tracing purposes. Now, after pressure from the American Civil Liberties Union, the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services has backtracked on that guidance. The question is still required, but you no longer have to comply to get service. I'll note here that this change does not apply to hair salons, spas, gyms, and fitness centers. Now for some election updates. A video of a wagon with some gear owned by WXYZ TV7 that was being wheeled into the TCF Center in Detroit was claimed by a couple of prominent far-right media groups as evidence of bringing ballots into the facility where they're being counted. But actually, it was a cooler and equipment for covering the election for the local station. Look, there is a ton of misinformation going around right now. Here's another one. A post from an unverified source has gone viral, claiming 95% of registered Detroiters voted with the goal of cheering on the city. Here's the thing. A number of right-wing groups are using screenshots of that to say that absentee turnout is higher than it should be, an expectation that was set by the clerk at a bit over 50%. The actual turnout in Detroit, according to the city clerk's website with 100% of ballots counted, was just over 49%. Bottom line is anything and everything is getting twisted around right now. And that takes me to the next thing, where a suit filed by lawyers of the Trump campaign was thrown out by a judge today. The campaign alleged that they had been denied access to see absentee ballot boxes. Court of Claims Judge Cynthia Stevens rejected the suit for 2 reasons. One, it was against the Secretary of State, but the Secretary's office does not do the counting in local cities. Clerks do. The other reason? The vote count was nearly complete when she issued the order. However, as the results settle in, Joe Biden's lead is much larger than the margin typically found in recounts and audits. It's sitting at around 150,000 votes with almost everything in. And practically, and to be clear, I'm not saying this should happen, you could remove more than 2/3 of Detroit's absentee ballots and Joe Biden would still clearly win the statewide race. Yes, Detroit closed the deal for sure, but there are a couple underlying trends that helped Biden. One I've mentioned, Joe Biden outpaced the 2016 Democratic candidate, Hillary Clinton, by more than 90,000 votes in Oakland County. That used to be a Republican stronghold, but now 3 of 4 county offices are held by Democrats, and all indications are it's going to stay that way for a while, if not get bluer as the county diversifies. The second isn't as much of a raw vote count thing, but more of an indicator. The 5 Grosse Pointes have been known for years as a center of conservatism. There have been movies made around its opulence and wealth, and many stories done about the wealth gap at its border with the city. But this election, Joe Biden bested Trump by more than 8.5 points. With all the contention in the recent 2020 election, there is something statewide that almost everybody agreed on, except for the 11% of people who vote no seemingly on everything. And that is Proposal 20-2, and that requires a warrant for electronic data. Being that this is so overwhelmingly popular, I wanted to dive into what this means on a practical basis. And of course, to do that, technology expert Tom Lawrence. Good to talk to you, sir.
Oh, I love talking about things that people agree on.
Well, and also unpacking what it really means, because I will admit there just wasn't as much media coverage around this one, but I think it has long-term implications, especially with how much technology is embedded into our everyday life.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about what this is. There's a company called Cellebrite, Cellbrite. I might be Cellebrite. I'm not sure. But what I am sure about one thing with Cellebrite, they're a company that can copy cell phones. And they actually had suffered a data breach and brought some attention to themselves a number of years ago. And then people want to know, well, who's buying this product? And what it is basically they have different versions of this that are able to clone your phone, copy all of the data on it. And that brought up a lot of questions that the ACLU brought up, and it very specifically how it affects us here in the state of Michigan. What this proposal was, the Michigan State Police were listed as one of their clients. And people said, that's interesting. And then we had a couple of times where the Michigan State Police were stopping people and without a warrant, wanting their phones, as I understood this. And this was a fuzzy reporting that went on a little while ago. So finally, someone said, we need a clarification. So this is an amendment to offer clarification of whether or not it is legal for the police without a warrant to simply say, hey, let me see your phone, and then clone an entire copy of it. Now, I'll read a little bit very briefly here what the Cellebrite system can copy. All your call activity, your phone book directory information, voicemails, text messages, photos, videos, which apps you're using, saved passwords, geolocation history, including cell tower and Wi-Fi networks. Our phones are giant tattletale devices. They know a lot about who we are, what we do, what ads we interact with, what apps we use, things we say, and what we at least would assume are private. So having a copy of all this to start a phishing expedition when there's no warrant, there's not like I've been accused. You're like, hey, give me your phone because we want a copy of it. And normally, under other circumstances, we would say come back with a warrant, but it was always fuzzy and unclear. And rather wait for a lot of case precedents to work its way through our court system, an amendment was made, and that's what this was, which was passed, that says they need a warrant to acquire this information about you.
And a constitutional amendment is important because that means it's got more force than just, say, a law or a statute. This is part of the framework of our state. And I think this is important as I was covering an event, I can't remember exactly, I think it was 3 years ago, and police actually demanded my phone. I was tweeting and covering the event. They demanded it. I just refused. And they didn't press the issue. I just said, I'm press. I'm not going to hand you my phone. And this is something that I've heard over and over again that police do just as the course of business to get a hold of things. Now, obviously, not every officer, not every department, but I've heard enough complaints of this over the years that I would say that this is pretty widespread as a tactic. And the two things that I would note here that it does is, number one, it prohibits unreasonable searches or seizures of a person's electronic data and electronic communications. So that's more than your phone. And then two, require a search warrant to access a person's electronic data or electronic communications under the same conditions currently required for the government to obtain a search warrant to search a person's house or seize a person's things. So this goes way farther than a cell phone, Tom.
Yes, it's nice that they wrote it so broad. Cell phone would be the easy way to talk about it now because it's very familiar. But you're right, 5 years from now, what are we going to have next? And that's what this is trying to cover. We keep so much information about ourselves electronically, more so than ever before. I mean, there was no question of whether or not if there was a document at my house, could the police just stop by and pick it up and ask for a copy of whenever they wanted? No, we understand there's a warrant for if you wanted to get a hold of my call history or something that was a document controlled by an outside party or even something I had a copy of in my house. That's pretty well established. You would get a warrant to get my phone records in a traditional sense of, contacting a phone company. Very different now when we are the holders of so much personal data and it's so accessible and so easy to just make a copy of everything this person did and we'll take the time to sort it out later. And I'm glad this clarification kind of puts that out there. No, your, digital representation of yourself, your digital you is now protected, much like the physical world you. You can't just run around doing this. You have to get a warrant. There is a due process of law that needs to be followed. So it's a good thing. That's the short answer of it all.
Well, before I let you go, what are, say, 2 or 3 things that the average person just needs to keep in mind with this to just protect themselves in general? Just what are a couple things folks should do just to make sure that not just a situation where folks are trying to get in without a warrant, but just in general, what are a couple of the top value things to do?
A couple of things that are really important are going to be, and this is supported on the 2 popular phone platforms, both iPhone and the Android. Both modern phones support levels of encryption and good passwords on them. Do use those. They are aware of companies like Cellbrite existing, and both the Android platform and the iPhone platform have worked very, very hard to make their phones harder to copy. And they did it based on knowing that this technology exists. So that's at least one good excuse, legal and legit excuse to upgrade your phone, other than I want a new one. But taking the time to make sure there's a password on there. Also, just in case someone acquires your device, you leave it sitting on a table somewhere or at a restaurant. One of the things you should always do is there's usually options for privacy on devices. An example would be when you get a message, does that message show up or on the screen before you unlock it? There's a couple by default on a lot of phones it does. And there's a few options you can go into and say, hey, don't show personal messages. Don't show my text message. This is really important because if you think about how password resets and things like that work, well, I can't unlock the person's phone, but I can do a password reset. I can't see the phone because I can't unlock it. But if I swipe down on notifications while it's locked, it shows me notifications. Seems really convenient. But is it? I will also give a huge shout out, and I've talked about this a couple times, like on my YouTube channel, the Signal Messenger, which is a private communications app. The government has been less than thrilled with it. It is a wonderful communications platform that is, once again, cross-platform, including desktop and everything else. It works not just on your phone, but is a way to communicate securely with people and has the option to expire messages, which is really important because think about those conversations. Do they really need to be kept in archive? Not having the data is one of the safest ways to keep it.
That's true. And I will add here that over the years, I have known people to be a little bit hesitant if somebody's got, especially a jealous spouse or somebody that they're dating or something like that, being suspicious about not showing those messages. But I'll tell you, a good number of the people that I know that do things, have work that's important or sensitive in any kind of way, not even in a national security sense, but in a company sense, they do this because if you think about it, let's say you're in a board meeting or let's say you're in some sort of business meeting, you leave your phone on the table, you go to the bathroom, people might look at your phone. And that's a thing.
Yeah.
People are always wanting to try to get into that information. So some of those basic steps are really great. Tom Lawrence, thank you so much for spending some time with us. It's great to talk to you.
Pleasure as always.
You can find Tom on YouTube. Just search for Lawrence Systems or on Twitter at Tom Lawrence Tech. Now to the corner of Grand Boulevard and 2nd in Detroit's New Center.
Yeah, my name is Art Reyes, and I'm the executive director of We the People Michigan.
Okay, so for the uninitiated, what is We the People Michigan?
Yeah, so We the People Michigan is a community organizing group that's building multiracial working class power across the state of Michigan. So we have teams from the Upper Peninsula to Detroit.
Obviously, the election is what brought you down here. Are there rallies happening across the state right now?
There are, yeah. So actually right now, as we're here marching in the streets, demanding that every vote be counted, they're also doing it in Traverse City, in Munising, in Lansing, in Grand Rapids, in Benton Harbor, in Ann Arbor. there are communities all across the state that are standing up and saying, we demand that our voices be heard, that every vote be counted.
What is it about the current situation that's gotten people just so fired up on this whole thing? One of the things I thought that was interesting was there was a mention up on the stage about don't go down to TCF Center. It was almost like a bait, if you will, if you follow that bait. What's, in your view, happening?
So in my view, what's happening right now is we have a lawsuit that's been filed to try and stop the counting of votes, which happens when someone believes they are losing, an attempt to kind of rig the rules. And what we see that as is a deeply, deeply undemocratic move on that. But we also actually trust the process of what's happening with the election administration right now. Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson has administered a really fantastic election. We were down there last night. Many of us went down because there were a number of challengers that came to challenge votes. And we were able to see firsthand how much Detroiters were in there. Election workers were there counting ballots. The system was working well. And there were people there seeking to intimidate them. And right now, the counting is almost done. And what we're seeing is essentially a tantrum that's being thrown right now. And we're just not going to get baited into that. Instead, what we did today was we marched through neighborhoods with this message that says, look, no one is going to take away our democracy. We're going to make sure that every vote is counted. And it was a really beautiful way for communities to come together and express that loudly.
Late last night, we got a lot of reports of new challengers basically being bussed in and arriving. Where are these folks from, and why are they here? Because if you think about it, Detroit's a city that is majority African American. It is a city with a lot of independence, and for a lot of reasons, right? Because frankly, black people couldn't vote until 60 years ago. So what is it you're seeing?
What we saw yesterday, and what we've seen pretty consistently, was there was a false narrative that was being drummed up that was telling people that there was going to be fraud that was happening. It was rooted in a very specific divide and conquer strategy that was telling people that Detroit, the largest black city in the country, couldn't handle counting the election, that there was going to be fraud occurring. It was rooted in a dog whistle racist narrative. And what we saw was people coming from all over the place to be here in this community, challenging people's votes actually being counted. And so what we saw was that there was a number of folks who showed up. There's about 60 folks, and community showed up. Once we got word that there were people that were there that were intimidating the election workers who were just doing their jobs and counting votes, we made sure that there was people from community organizing groups, from labor unions, community leaders that were there just to make sure that election workers could do their job. And we showed up in droves. In about an hour, we had over 150 people that showed up to make sure that they were there as opposing challengers, to make sure that election workers who were doing their jobs, literally making the wheels of democracy turn, that they weren't being intimidated. And it was really beautiful to see.
And if people want to get involved in what you're doing, how can they do that?
Yeah, so one of the things that's happening right now is there's actually a website called WeMakeMichigan.com. So we've built a robust coalition of community organizing groups, labor unions, faith leaders, neighborhood groups all across the state under the banner of We Make Michigan, to ensure that our democracy is protected, that every vote is counted. And what we're really intent on doing for the rest of this week is celebrating the historic voter turnout that we had and letting folks know that it's not just about the election. It is about us being able to come together to demand the dignity that all of our communities deserve.
All right, that's it for our show. Thank you so much for listening. If this work moves you, if it's something you can do, it's our members that support us and keep things going. You can join them at dailydetroit.com/support. I'm Jer Stays. Take care of each other, and I'll see you around Detroit.